Hey guys, it's Giant Munsties. I don't think I need to tell you that Pacific Rim Uprising hits theaters this week. And so what I want to do is a review of the original Pacific Rim that came out in 2013, 5 years ago. Can you believe that? So personally, whenever I heard Pacific Rim was coming out, it was kind of bad timing because I was really frustrated that Godzilla 2014 kept getting delayed. It was supposed to come out in 2012 and then they announced that it was pushed back 2 full years. And so I was really hyped about that. If Pacific Rim had been released before Godzilla was even announced, it would have had my full attention. But having Pacific Rim be released only a year before Godzilla 2014, this film quickly became little more than something to hold me over till Godzilla hit. So whenever I went to the theater for the first time, I was excited for kaiju action, but I wasn't fully invested in the moment. Now, something happened to me between the theatrical release and the home media release. Whenever it hit Blu-ray, I scooped that up and I learned to appreciate the movie for what it was. However, I do recall distinctly that when I was in the theater seeing this film for the first time, there were still a few scenes that were so shocking and so sudden that caught me off guard. Now, if you haven't seen this movie, I'm going to get into some spoilers, so you might want to tune out right about now. For example, one of the moments that really got to me was whenever they fight the Knifehead kaiju. Knifehead pierces Gypsy Danger and rips out the co-pilot. It was so detailed and so surprising that moments like that is what kept this movie reserved in the back of my mind. Another moment was when the female character, which I can't remember her name, even though I just watched the movie. I can't remember any of the characters' names, which we'll get into details about how memorable this movie really is. We'll get to that in a moment. But when the female character has her flashback scene, that in the theater got to me too. Actually, I was there with a friend who had just got up and went to the bathroom during that scene. Comes back to like, did I miss anything? I'm like, yeah, the best moment in the whole movie. But what do I think of the movie nowadays, 5 years later? Well, to start off, the CGI has aged. I mean, even whenever I saw this in the theaters, there was a couple scenes that you could tell were not up to the standards of the other moments in the film. However, everything, including the trespasser scene, which was beautiful when I first saw it. Nowadays, when I look at it, I'm like, yeah, it looks a little more than a video game character. But I think it still serves its purpose. It's not completely outdated. It hasn't aged terribly. I think it's aging with enough grace that someday in the future, people will be able to look back at this and still see what the director was aiming for. Like you look back at films like the original Godzilla film or Creature from the Black Lagoon. Sure, those are clearly just rubber suits and they're outdated by all standards, but the effects still hold enough weight to convey the message or the meaning of the scene. And I think the same thing can be said about Pacific Rim. Sure, it will look cartoony in the future the more we look back at it, but it'll still deliver a point. But there are still some very beautiful shots of kaiju, mainly at night, that hold up pretty well to today's standards. The whole fight in the bay holds up really well. As for the kaiju themselves, they're a little similar. I mean, I understand that the plot says that these monsters are being engineered as pretty much soldiers or scouts. And so maybe the yellow markings on their body is really just like army markings. And there is some really different kaiju, like Knifehead, the gorilla looking monster, and the one with wings. They're completely different, but at the same time, so many of the kaiju feel almost identical. I mean, Trespasser and what was the other one? Axehead, those are pretty much identical kaiju, just different paint jobs. If you ever collected the figures, you'd know. But as far as similar as these kaiju are to each other, they're still so different from most kaiju films that you can still easily find them new and enjoyable. As for the actual plot, it's pretty coherent. There's enough substance to keep you invested in the film. However, in rewatching this lately, I noticed an unfinished plot. In the very beginning of the movie, they introduced the concept of kaiju blue, which is this toxic blood that kaiju spill out. And they address that as contaminating oceans, and they build it up as if it's going to affect the economy or resources, but nothing really happens. It's never mentioned again. It's not used as a weapon, which it might be in maybe the sequel, but when they made this movie, they didn't know if there was going to be a sequel or not. So it's really just a loose end that they left here. However, despite the kaiju blue not being brought up again, there is still a lot of effort that the director, Guillermo del Toro, put a lot of effort into these movies. There's a fairly deep scene of thousands of workers building a wall to keep out the kaiju, and they address that people can just fall off and die, and that's why there's always job openings. The plot with the black market featuring Hannibal Chow. There's also, in the beginning, advertisements for Jaeger sneakers, just showing how capitalism would work off a giant monster attack. It's all a really nice touch. But when it comes to world building, I think the best thing that the director does is give each nation its own Jaeger to root for. There's a beautiful message of seeing the world united for a common cause. it really does develop a sense of environment on a global scale. It's like, for as invested this movie is into setting up the universe, it's also missing certain things. There's a lot of cheesy moments in the movie too, where the characters are supposed to be presented as badasses, and the studio or the director just feels like they had the liberty to make certain jokes and the audience will automatically go along with it, or that you just think these characters are so cool that you're going to approve of anything that they do. And so there's a lot of cheesy moments if you're not on board with the characters. But my biggest problem with this movie is with the ending. The two main characters throughout the whole movie kindle this attraction between each other, and then nothing happens in the end. Now, I don't go to a kaiju movie looking for a romance, but the ending is so conflicting. It's as if somebody didn't want to portray an interracial kiss in this movie. Whether it was the studio, the actors, or the director, which I highly doubt it was the director because he just made The Shape of Water, which is about a human making out with a fish. But the tension at the end of this scene, the awkwardness, it reminds me of the story behind the first interracial kiss on television in the original Star Trek series. The studio did not want a white and black kiss on television. They made it happen, and it's a really interesting story for you to look up. But I feel like somebody here said, wait, no, we can't actually have this white guy kiss this Asian. And it was completely just awkwardly stopped here. Maybe the actors didn't want to kiss each other because they just truly hated each other that much. We need an explanation about what happened with that thread. There was a romance building up the whole movie, and then they just stare awkwardly at each other at the end. Look, I know I've bashed this movie a few times here in this review, but I'm glad that it's out there. If you've put up with any weird or bad kaiju movies like I have in the past, I'm not talking about Godzilla or Gamera, there's things that are so far below the bottom of the barrel out there. If you can put up with some of those worst knockoff kaiju movies that are out there, then there's no reason that you can't find enjoyment in Pacific Rim, and I have tons of faith in the sequel. I'm glad the sequel's here, and I'll be back later with that review. What did you think of Pacific Rim? Are you going to see the sequel? Are you hoping for a MonsterVerse crossover? Let me know if your opinion has changed about Pacific Rim over the years. Giant Munsties, and I want to thank you for watching once again.
Today we face the monsters that are at our door and bring the fight to them. Today we are canceling the apocalypse. Yay!